The Grand Nexus Station floated in the darkness of space, a massive structure built by 1,000 different species over centuries. Inside its main chamber, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for an emergency meeting. The air was thick with tension as holographic displays showed images of human ships moving through star systems that had been empty for millions of years. Kreth stood at the center of the chamber, his scaled skin reflecting the blue light from the displays. He was the chief ambassador of the Vorth Empire, and his voice carried the weight of ancient authority. He pointed at the screen showing human colony ships and military vessels. The humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 5 years ago, yet they were already spreading across dozens of systems. Kreth argued that this expansion was dangerous and needed to be stopped immediately. The insectoid representatives of the Hive Collective clicked their mandibles in agreement. Their spokesperson, a creature called Vex, displayed data about human history. The information showed centuries of warfare, violence, and conquest. Humans had fought each other for resources, for beliefs, for land. Even now, Vex claimed, their military grew stronger each year. Why would a peaceful species need so many weapons? Commander Hayan sat in the human delegation area, feeling frustration build in his chest. He was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes. He had spent 3 years trying to help humanity join the galactic community peacefully. Now he watched a species that had never met a human in person decided humanity's fate based on old history files and fear. He raised his hand to speak, but Kreth talked over him. Captain Jiwoo stood beside Hayan, her hand resting on the handle of her ceremonial blade. She commanded the Earth Defense Fleet's flagship and had come to the station hoping for diplomatic solutions. Instead, she saw dozens of species nodding along as Kreth painted humans as monsters waiting to devour the galaxy. She whispered to Hayan that they should leave, but he shook his head. They had to try to make the council understand. The debate continued for hours. Some species spoke in favor of giving humanity more time. The aquatic delphins argued that every species deserved a chance to prove themselves. The crystalline lumens suggested opening cultural exchange programs. But these voices were few and quiet compared to the war drums being beaten by the Vorth and the Hive Collective. Finally, the Council Arbiter called for a vote on the Vorth proposal. Humanity would be given 1 week to halt all expansion and withdraw from 12 disputed star systems. If they refused, the Council would authorize military action to enforce the borders. Hayan jumped to his feet and shouted that this was insane. Those systems were uninhabited. No species had claimed them in recorded history. How could humanity withdraw from empty space? His words fell on deaf ears. The vote passed by a wide margin. Captain Jiwoo felt ice in her veins as she realized what this meant. She grabbed Hayan's arm and pulled him toward the exit. They needed to warn Earth immediately. As they rushed through the corridors of the station, Jiwoo contacted her ship and ordered them to prepare for immediate departure. Meanwhile, Engineer Minho worked in a small monitoring station near the docking bay. He was a civilian contractor hired to maintain the human delegation's computer systems. His job was boring most days, but he was good with technology and enjoyed the steady pay. Today, however, something caught his attention. Encrypted Vorth communications were passing through the station's network at an unusual rate. Minho knew he wasn't supposed to intercept alien transmissions, but his curiosity got the better of him. He created a small program to copy the data streams and began analyzing them. What he found made his blood run cold. The Vorth weren't planning to wait for the 1-week deadline. Their fleet was already moving into position. The communications detailed target coordinates, fleet movements, attack timelines. The primary target wasn't a disputed system or a military installation. It was Colony Sejong, a peaceful settlement of 15,000 humans on a planet called New Pyongyang. The colony had farms, schools, and research centers. Most of the residents were families who had left Earth looking for a fresh start. The Vorth planned to destroy it completely as a demonstration of power. Minho's hands shook as he copied the files onto a secure drive. He ran through the station corridors, pushing past confused aliens as he searched for Commander Hayan or Captain Jiwoo. He found them at their ship's docking port, already preparing to depart. He thrust the data drive into Han's hands and gasped out what he had discovered. Gu took the drive and plugged it into her portable terminal. Her face went pale as she read the attack plans. She immediately ordered her crew to send a priority alert to Colony Sejong and to Earth Defense Command. But they were too far away. The message would take hours to reach human space. The Vorth fleet would arrive at New Pyongyang in less than 2 hours. Hyun slumped against the wall, the weight of failure crushing him. He had come to the Grand Nexus believing in diplomacy and cooperation. He had trusted that reason would prevail. Now thousands of innocent people were about to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jiwoo placed a hand on his shoulder and told him this wasn't his fault, but they both knew the galaxy had just changed forever. The human delegation's ship undocked from the Grand Nexus and jumped 2 faster than light speed, racing toward home. Behind them, the Vorth Armada was already moving into position around New Pyongyang. The aliens expected an easy victory. They thought one quick strike would make the humans understand their place in the galactic order. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. Humanity had spent decades building their civilization on the principle of peace and cooperation, but buried deep in their nature was something the aliens didn't understand. Humans had not forgotten how to fight. They had simply chosen not to. That choice was about to end. The emergency broadcast reached Earth at 0400 hours. President Yoonji was pulled from her bed by security officers who handed her a tablet showing the intercepted.
I went for
She read the attack plans twice, her face expressionless. Then she asked how long until the attack began. 90 minutes, they told her. Not enough time to evacuate. Not enough time to send reinforcements. Only enough time to watch. The attack on Colony Sejong was broadcast across every human network. People across Earth and the outer colonies watched in real time as Vorth warships emerged from faster-than-light travel above New Pyongyang. The colonists had received the warning but had nowhere to run. Governor Taijin ordered all civilians into underground shelters. But everyone knew those shelters wouldn't survive a sustained orbital bombardment, the first volley of plasma. Weapons struck the colony's main settlement at dawn. Buildings that had stood for 20 years vanished in brilliant flashes of light. The agricultural domes that fed 15,000 people melted into slag. The schools where children learned to read were reduced to smoking craters. The Vorth ships circled the planet methodically, destroying every human structure they could detect. Some colonists tried to fight back with the few defensive weapons they had. Mining lasers and construction equipment were turned against the warships, but it was like throwing stones at a mountain. The Vorth didn't even bother to return fire on these attempts. They simply continued their systematic destruction. When the bombardment finally stopped 3 hours later, Colony Sejong had ceased to exist. The death toll was catastrophic. 11,000 civilians dead, 3,000 missing and presumed dead. Only a few hundred survivors pulled from collapsed shelters. Earth watched the casualty reports scroll across their screens in numb silence. Then the silence turned to something else. Something cold and ancient stirred in the human collective consciousness. President Yoonji addressed the United Earth government within hours. Her speech was broadcast to every human settlement in known space. She spoke calmly, without anger or tears. She stated the facts clearly. An unprovoked attack had been carried out against human civilians. Thousands of families had been murdered. The Galactic Council had sanctioned this action through their ultimatum. Therefore, Earth was withdrawing from all galactic treaties and declaring a state of total war against the Vorth Empire and any species that supported them. Admiral Deho received his orders at Earth Defense Command. He was a career military officer who had spent 30 years preparing for a war he hoped would never come. Now it was here, and he felt a strange sense of clarity settle over him. He opened secure files that only a handful of people knew existed. Contingency plans created during humanity's darkest days, when nuclear weapons threatened to end civilization. Plans for how to fight when survival itself was at stake. The orders went out across human space within minutes. Every shipyard immediately switched to wartime production. Civilian factories were converted to military use. Mining operations in the asteroid belts were redirected to extract materials for ship construction. Automated systems that had been built but never activated came online. The industrial capacity of humanity, which had been focused on peaceful expansion, turned toward a single purpose. Building a war machine, scientist Yuna walked through the underground, a laboratory complex beneath Seoul. She had worked here for 15 years on projects the government classified as top secret. Her team had developed weapon systems that were never supposed to be used. Technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics and ethics. Humanity had built these things in secret, hoping they would serve only as deterrents. Now she received authorization to deploy them all. Project Tempest had been her life's work. It started as theoretical research into advanced propulsion systems, but evolved into something far more dangerous. She had found ways to weaponize antimatter at scales previously thought impossible. She had designed AI systems that could coordinate thousands of combat drones with inhuman precision. She had created kinetic weapons that could accelerate projectiles to relativistic speeds, turning simple metal slugs into planet-killing weapons. Other scientists across Earth were activating their own projects. Biological warfare specialists prepared nanomachines that could target specific alien. DNA physicists tested gravity manipulation devices that could crush ships like tin cans. Engineers unveiled stealth systems that made human vessels nearly invisible to alien sensors. Everything humanity had learned about the universe was being turned into weapons. Marine. Commander Taeyong gathered his troops at Camp Gindo, the largest military training facility on Earth. He looked at the men and women who would be the first to face the aliens in ground combat. Many were young, fresh out of basic training. Others were veterans who had fought in the small skirmishes that broke out during humanity's expansion. All of them had volunteered when they heard about Colony Sajong. He told them what they were about to face. The Vorth were larger and stronger than humans. The Hive Collective soldiers fought with perfect coordination through their shared consciousness. Other alien species had natural weapons and armor that humans lacked. But Taeyang had studied military history his entire life, and he knew something the aliens didn't. Humans had fought each other for thousands of years. They had refined the art of killing into a science. They understood tactics, strategy, and the psychology of warfare better than any species in the galaxy. The second attack came 3 days after Colony Sajong. The Vorth, emboldened by their easy victory, sent fleets to attack 2 more human colonies, New Hanbit and Prosperity Station. But this time, humanity was ready. Defense satellites that had been disguised as communications relays activated their hidden weapon systems. Minefields that hadn't existed a week ago suddenly appeared in the approaching fleet's path. Commander Taeyong led the defense of New Hanbet personally. When Vorth soldiers landed and began their ground assault, they expected panicked civilians and token resistance. Instead, they found fortified positions manned by soldiers who fought with terrifying efficiency. Every street became a killing zone. Every building became a fortress. The Vorth had superior numbers and technology. But the humans had something else. They were fighting for their homes, and they would rather die than surrender. The battle for New Hanbit lasted 2 days. In the end, the Vorth took the colony, but their casualties shocked their commanders. For every human soldier killed, 10 Vorth lay dead. The civilians who couldn't evacuate had armed themselves with whatever they could find. Old people and teenagers fought alongside trained Marines. The Vorth had won the battle, but they had paid a price they never anticipated. Reports from New Hanbet reached the Vorth command. For the first time, Doubt crept into their strategic planning. The humans were not behaving like conquered prey. They were fighting back with an intensity that seemed insane. When Vorth soldiers boarded damaged human ships expecting surrender, human crews would detonate their own reactors, taking the boarding parties with them. This wasn't how war was supposed to work. Admiral Deho read the battle reports and allowed himself a grim smile. The aliens were learning, but they were learning too slowly. Humanity's shipyards were producing vessels at 3 times the projected rate. New weapons were being deployed faster than the aliens could adapt. Most importantly, humanity was united in a way it had never been before. Every human, from Earth to the furthest colony, now had a single goal: make the aliens regret ever attacking them. 3 weeks after Colony Sajong fell, Admiral Deho launched Operation Reckoning. The Earth Defense Fleet had grown from 800 ships to over 2,000 through rapid construction. The new vessels were designed specifically for war, stripped of all non-essential systems and loaded with weapons that the aliens had never seen before. The Admiral chose his first target carefully: the Vorth Supply Depot in the Epsilon Sector. The Epsilon Sector was deep in Vorth-controlled space, far from any human colony. The supply depot there served as the main logistics hub for the Vorth invasion force. Destroying it would cripple the alien war effort for months, but it was heavily defended, surrounded by military stations and patrol fleets. The Vorth considered it untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise. Captain Sora commanded the warship Indomitable, one of the new rapid construction vessels. Her crew consisted entirely of volunteers who had lost family at Colony Sejong. They didn't talk much among themselves. They simply did their jobs with cold efficiency, waiting for the moment they could strike back. When Admiral Deho's orders came through, Sora gathered her crew and told them what they already knew. Many of them wouldn't survive this mission. No one asked to be reassigned. The human fleet approached the Epsilon Sector using a tactic the aliens had never encountered. Instead of the standard formation patterns used by every galactic military, the human ships spread out across thousands of kilometers. They moved erratically, changing speed and direction randomly. To the Vorth sensors, it looked like chaos. It was actually a carefully choreographed plan, where each ship acted independently while contributing to the overall strategy. The Vorth defense fleet moved to intercept, expecting a conventional battle. Instead, the human ships split into smaller groups and attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Some ships launched swarms of small drones that overwhelmed alien point defense systems. Others fired long-range kinetic weapons that traveled so fast they couldn't be tracked. A few ships simply accelerated to ramming speed and crashed directly into Vorth capital ships before they could react. Sora led her squadron in a direct assault on the supply depot itself. The Vorth had positioned their largest warships around it, creating a defensive wall that seemed impenetrable. Sora studied the formation for 30 seconds, then ordered her ships to dive below the orbital plane where the Vorth coverage was weakest. They came up underneath the depot and fired everything they had. Point-blank range. The explosion from the depot's destruction lit up the sector like a second sun. Stored antimatter and weapons detonated in a chain reaction that destroyed the depot and 6 nearby Vorth ships. Sora's ship took heavy damage from the blast, its hull breaching in multiple sections. She ordered the crew to evacuate to the escape pods, but she stayed at the helm. The Vorth flagship was trying to retreat. She still had engines. With her ship dying around her, Sora accelerated toward the Vorth flagship. The aliens fired everything they had at her, but the Indomitable was already broken and burning. There was nothing left to destroy. She keyed the intercom and spoke her last words to any crew still aboard. For Sejong. For humanity. For everyone they took from us. Then she pushed the engines to maximum and crashed into the flagship at relativistic speed. The impact was visible from 3 star systems away. The Vorth flagship and 16 nearby capital ships simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the kinetic energy of the collision. The remaining Vorth forces broke formation and retreated in panic. Admiral Deho watched the battle reports and marked Captain Sora's name for the memorial wall. Then he began planning the next attack. While the military won victories in space, intelligence officer Jiho fought a different kind of war. He worked in a classified facility beneath Tokyo, monitoring alien communications and searching for weaknesses. His team had cracked the Vorth encryption codes early in the war, giving humanity a significant advantage. But recently, Jiho had found something more valuable than tactical intelligence. The Galactic Council was fracturing. Species that had supported the Vorth were having second thoughts as casualty reports piled up. The Hive Collective had lost an entire battle group to human tactics they couldn't predict. Smaller species were quietly withdrawing their support and declaring neutrality. The Council had expected humanity to crumble under pressure. Instead, the humans were winning, and it scared them. Jiho compiled reports showing internal Council communications. Representatives were arguing about whether to continue supporting the Vorth. Some species were suggesting they had made a terrible mistake attacking humanity. Others worried that if the Vorth fell, humanity would turn its war machine against the entire galaxy in revenge. The fear was palpable in their messages. He sent his findings to President Yoonji, along with a recommendation. Humanity needed to make the war so costly that even the most stubborn council members would demand peace, not through indiscriminate destruction, but through calculated strikes that proved humanity could hurt them anywhere, anytime. Make them afraid, Jiho wrote. Make them understand that fighting us means losing everything. President Yoonji took the recommendation to heart. She authorized a new strategy that Admiral Daeho had proposed, but hesitated to suggest. Humanity would target not just military assets, but the economic infrastructure supporting the Vorth war effort. Mining operations, trade routes, manufacturing centers. Not civilian targets, but everything that made the Vorth military possible. Cut off the supply, and the war machine stops. Engineer Minho, now working directly for military research, completed his most controversial project. He had developed a nanotech weapon that spread through alien populations like a virus. It wasn't designed to kill. Instead, it attacked the nervous systems of Vorth soldiers, causing temporary paralysis that lasted for weeks. Infected soldiers couldn't fight, couldn't work, could barely function. They became burdens on their medical systems rather than warriors. The weapon was deployed at the Battle of Kepler Station, where Vorth forces were attempting to establish a forward base. Human ships released clouds of nanomachines into the station's atmosphere. Within hours, thousands of Vorth soldiers collapsed, their bodies refusing to respond to commands. The psychological impact was devastating. Vorth commanders panicked, unsure if this was a permanent condition or if death would follow. The ethical debates raged across human government and military channels. Some argued that biological weapons crossed a line humanity shouldn't cross. Others pointed out that the Vorth had killed thousands of civilians at Colony Sejong without hesitation. War was terrible, but humanity hadn't started this. They were simply using every tool available to end it as quickly as possible. The Galactic Council convened another emergency session. This time, there were no speeches about human expansion being a threat. Instead, there were quiet discussions about negotiating peace. The Delphins and Lumens, who had argued for giving humanity a chance from the beginning, now spoke with more authority. They had been right, and everyone knew it. Attacking humanity had been catastrophic. But the Vorth refused to back down. Ambassador Kreth, his career and empire crumbling around him, declared that the Vorth would never surrender to primitives. He argued that one final massive assault would break human resistance. The council was divided. Some species wanted immediate peace talks. Others feared that abandoning the Vorth now would make them look weak. The debate dragged on while the war continued. Admiral Daeho received intelligence that made his blood run cold. The Vorth were gathering every available warship for one last desperate attack. The target was Earth itself. Kreth had convinced his military leaders that destroying humanity's home world would end the war instantly. They were committing their entire remaining fleet, thousands of ships. To the assault, Jiho's analysts confirmed the reports. Every Vorth vessel, from massive dreadnoughts to small patrol craft, was moving toward human space. It would be the largest single military operation in galactic history. If the Vorth succeeded, humanity would be crippled. If they failed, the Vorth Empire would effectively cease to exist as a military power. President Yoon called an emergency cabinet meeting. Admiral Daeho presented the situation clearly. Earth had to prepare for total war. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier would be needed. The battle would be fought in Earth's orbit, and the survival of humanity depended on winning. He requested authorization to activate every defensive protocol ever designed. No matter how experimental or dangerous, Yunji gave the authorization without hesitation. Then she addressed the people of Earth directly. She told them the truth. A massive alien fleet was coming to destroy their home. But humanity had faced extinction before and survived. They had the weapons, the ships, and most importantly, the will to fight. Earth would not fall. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when humans fought for their very survival. The Vorth Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. 3,000 capital ships, each one larger than a city block. Tens of thousands of support vessels and fighters. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. It had one purpose: destroy humanity's homeworld. The fleet's arrival was detected immediately by human sensor networks that had been expanded to cover the entire system. Admiral Deho stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, watching the tactical display light up with red markers. Each marker represented an enemy vessel. There were so many that they overlapped, creating solid clouds of red across the screen. His own fleet numbered just over 800 ships after weeks of continuous construction. The numbers were impossibly against them. But he had prepared for this. Ambassador Kreth broadcast his message to Earth on all frequencies. His voice was filled with triumph as he declared that humanity's resistance was over. He offered them one final chance to surrender unconditionally. All humans would be relocated to a single planet under Vorth's supervision. Their technology would be confiscated. Their military would be disbanded. The alternative was complete annihilation. President Yunji's response was short. She appeared on every screen across Earth and the colonies, her face calm and determined. She said simply, "Come and try." Then she cut the transmission. Across Earth, billions of people went to their shelters and waited. They had faith in their military, their technology, and their fellow humans. If this was the end, they would face it standing. The Vorth fleet began its advance toward Earth, moving in a massive formation that stretched across millions of kilometers. They expected human ships to meet them in deep space for a traditional fleet engagement. Instead, the human fleet stayed close to Earth, positioned around defensive installations that had been built over the past month. Weapons platforms, minefields, automated defense networks. Earth itself bristled with orbital cannons and planetary shield generators. Admiral Deho let them come. Every kilometer the Vorth traveled deeper into the solar system, brought them closer to Earth's prepared defenses. Long-range human sensors tracked every enemy ship, feeding data into targeting computers. Millions of calculations were performed every second, planning firing solutions for weapons aliens had never encountered. The Vorth fleet reached the asteroid belt and found their first surprise. What they thought were asteroids suddenly activated and revealed themselves as weapon platforms. Hundreds of installations opened fire simultaneously, launching missiles and kinetic projectiles into the Vorth formation. The aliens returned fire, destroying most of the platforms quickly. But they had lost 24 ships to the unexpected attack. Pilot Hannah led her fighter squadron from the carrier, stationed near Mars. She was 24 years old and had been flying for only 3 years. Her squadron consisted of 72 fighters, small craft that were fast and maneuverable but lightly armed. Against the Vorth fleet, they were like insects attacking elephants. But insects could sting, and Hannah intended to make every sting count. Her orders were simple: delay the Vorth, advance by any means necessary. By time for the main fleet to finish positioning around Earth, she knew what that meant. Her squadron was being sent on a suicide mission. When she explained this to her pilots, not one asked to be reassigned. They had all volunteered, knowing the risks. Many had lost homes or family to Vorth attacks. They wanted revenge, even if it cost them everything. The squadron screamed toward the Vorth Vanguard at maximum speed. Their fighters were too small for the enemy capital ships to target effectively, so they focused on the massive command carriers that coordinated the fleet. Hannah's fighter dodged through defensive fire that lit up space like a fireworks display. She launched her missiles at a carrier's bridge section, then immediately broke away. Behind her, the missiles struck home, and the carrier lost coordination. Other pilots followed her lead, targeting command and control systems across the Vorth fleet. The aliens struggled to respond to threats that were too fast and too small. Fighter after fighter was destroyed by point defense systems, but they took pieces of the Vorth fleet with them. After 10 minutes of continuous combat, Hannah's squadron had been reduced from 72 ships to 11. They had destroyed 31 Vorth vessels and damaged countless others. Hannah's fighter took a hit that knocked out her engines and life support. She had minutes before her oxygen ran out. She looked at her tactical display and saw a Vorth carrier nearby, its launch bays open as it deployed more fighters. She smiled grimly and used her maneuvering thrusters to aim her dying ship at those open bays. Her fighter slammed into the carrier at over 3,000 kilometers per hour, impact detonating her remaining missiles inside the carrier's hull. The explosion ripped the carrier apart from the inside. The Vorth fleet reached Earth's orbit, having lost over 300 ships to human defenses. But they still outnumbered the human fleet 3-1, and they had the momentum of their charge. The main battle began as the two fleets collided in the space above humanity's homeworld. What followed was chaos beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human ships fought with a savagery that shocked the Vorth commanders. Vessels that lost power didn't try to escape or surrender. They detonated their reactors, turning themselves into massive bombs that destroyed nearby enemy ships. When the Vorth attempted boarding actions, human crews would vent entire sections of their ships to space, killing the invaders and their own people together. Marine Commander Taeyong led counterboarding teams on the cruiser Justice when Vorth soldiers breached the hull. His Marines met the aliens in the narrow corridors with close-quarters combat that was brutal and personal. Taeyong had studied ancient human warfare, and he had trained his troops in techniques that were thousands of years old. Hand-to-hand combat, tactical positioning, psychological warfare. The Vorth were bigger and stronger, but humans were faster and more adaptable. The fighting spread throughout the ship. Taeyong's team pushed the Vorth back meter by meter, room by room. When the aliens tried to take the engine room, Taeyong personally led a charge that stopped them. He lost half his team in that fight, but the engines stayed under human control. By the time the Vorth boarding party was eliminated, both sides had suffered terrible casualties. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out on dozens of ships. The Vorth were learning a harsh truth. Humans didn't fight by galactic rules. There were no clean engagements or civilized surrenders. Every battle was total. Every soldier committed completely. The aliens had superior numbers and technology. But humans had something they couldn't match: desperation and rage, combined with deadly efficiency. Scientist Yuna watched the battle from the surface and knew it was time. She activated Project Tempest's final component, a network of satellites positioned throughout the solar system. These satellites had been disguised as communication relays, but they were actually components of the largest electromagnetic pulse weapon ever created. The weapon would shut down every electronic system in the entire battlefield area for 60 seconds. Admiral Deho received the activation code from Yuna. He understood what it meant. The pulse would cripple both fleets equally. Human ships would be just as disabled as Vorth vessels. But humans had prepared for this moment. Every ship had received special orders, 30 seconds before pulse activation: fire everything on automatic targeting systems. Then brace for the electromagnetic storm. The countdown began. Human ships across the battlefield suddenly increased their fire rate, launching every missile and firing every weapon they had. The Vorth were confused by this sudden intensity. Then the pulse hit. Every ship in Earth's orbit went dark simultaneously. Displays shut off. Engines died. Life support failed. Weapons stopped firing. For 60 seconds, the entire battlefield was silent, except for the drift of debris. When systems began rebooting after the pulse, the tactical situation had changed completely. The human weapons fired in those final 30 seconds had devastated the Vorth fleet while it was unable to defend itself. Hundreds of enemy ships were destroyed or crippled. The human fleet had suffered too, but their losses were proportionally smaller because they had known the pulse was coming. Admiral Deho's flagship was one of the first to restore power. He surveyed the battlefield and saw that the Vorth formation had collapsed. Their numerical advantage was gone, burned away in those 60 seconds of darkness. Now the fleets were roughly equal in strength, and the battle had shifted to Earth's favor. He ordered all functional ships to press the attack while the Vorth were still recovering. The Vorth commanders realized they had lost. Their grand assault had failed, their fleet was in ruins, and they were deep in human-controlled space with no reinforcements. Some ships tried to retreat, but human vessels hunted them down. Others surrendered, becoming the first Vorth to ever capitulate to humans. A few fought to the death, taking as many humans with them as they could. By the time the battle ended, 8 hours after it began, Earth's orbit was a graveyard. Debris from thousands of destroyed ships formed new rings around the planet. The human fleet was reduced to fewer than 200 functional vessels. But the Vorth Armada was destroyed. The silence after the battle was profound. Earth's orbit was filled with debris and the hulks of destroyed ships, both human and alien. Recovery crews worked around the clock, searching for survivors in the wreckage and trying to clear paths for the few remaining functional vessels. The casualty count was still being calculated, but everyone knew it would be measured in hundreds of thousands. Earth had survived, but the cost was almost unbearable. President Yoonji walked through the memorial hall, where walls were being filled with names of the fallen. Pilot Hannah, Captain Sora, and thousands of others who had sacrificed everything to defend humanity. She stopped at each section, reading names and remembering that each one represented a life, family, a future that would never happen. The weight of command had never felt heavier. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the third time since the war began. This time, there were no speeches about human aggression or territorial disputes. The representatives sat in shocked silence as they watched recordings of the battle for Earth. They had seen the size of the Vorth fleet. They had watched humanity defeat it anyway through tactics, weapons, and sheer determination that defied all their assumptions. Intelligence. Officer Jiho had been broadcasting select communications throughout the battle. Every council species had watched in real time as their military assessments proved catastrophically wrong. The species that had supported the Vorth now faced political crises at home. Citizens were demanding to know why their leaders had provoked such a dangerous enemy. The Hive Collective formally apologized to humanity and offered substantial reparations. Ambassador Kreth watched the battle reports from a detention cell on his home world. The Vorth government had stripped him of his position and rank, blaming him for leading the Empire into disaster. 3,000 ships destroyed, tens of thousands of soldiers dead, military infrastructure in ruins. The Vorth Empire would take generations to recover, if it ever did. All because Kreth had convinced them that humans were weak. The Council Arbiter called for order and announced that humanity would be given the floor to speak. Commander Heian was still recovering from injuries sustained when his ship was caught in the pulse weapons effect. So President Yoonji appeared via hologram to address the council herself. Her presence was commanding even through the display. She looked at each representative in turn before speaking. She did not shout or threaten. Her voice was calm and measured as she recounted the events that led to this moment. Humanity had sought peaceful cooperation with the galactic community. They had opened diplomatic channels, shared knowledge, and tried to find common ground. The council had responded with ultimatums and violence. Colony Sejong had been destroyed without warning. Thousands of civilians murdered to prove a point. Humanity had defended itself, Yoonji continued. Every action taken was in response to aggression initiated by the Vorth with council approval. Human forces could have pursued the retreating Vorth ships and destroyed them completely. They could have struck at Vorth civilian targets in revenge. They had the weapons and the capability. But they hadn't, because humanity still believed in proportional response and rules of engagement, even in total war. However, Yoonji's tone hardened. Humanity would not remain in the Galactic Council. The trust necessary for such cooperation had been destroyed. Earth was formally withdrawing from all galactic treaties and agreements. Human space was now closed to all alien vessels. Any ship that entered without explicit permission would be destroyed without warning. Humanity would pursue its own path among the stars, separate from the council that had tried to exterminate them. The council representatives tried to object, but Yunji cut them off. She stated that humanity had learned valuable lessons from this war. They had learned that other species would attack them out of fear rather than seek understanding. They had learned that the galaxy was not ready for peaceful coexistence. Most importantly, they had learned exactly how powerful they could become when united by a common threat. She ended her speech with a warning. Humanity wanted peace, but they would never again be unprepared for war. The industrial capacity mobilized during the conflict would not be dismantled. The weapons developed would not be forgotten. The lessons learned would be taught to every generation. If any species ever attacked humanity again, the response would make the Vorth defeat look merciful. Then she terminated the connection. Leaving the council in silence, Admiral Deho supervised the reconstruction of Earth's defenses. The orbital shipyards were expanded and reinforced. New weapon platforms were installed throughout the solar system. Defense protocols that had been experimental were now standard. Every human colony was fortified and supplied with enough military hardware to defend itself. Never again would humanity be caught unprepared. Engineer Minho, now promoted to head of weapons development, established research centers dedicated to studying alien technology. The Vorth ships captured during the battle were being taken apart and analyzed. Every advantage the aliens had was being learned and countered. Human scientists worked with military strategists to ensure that future conflicts would favor humanity even more decisively. Marine Commander Taiyang trained the next generation of soldiers at the expanded camp. Jindo, the young recruits who arrived, had grown up watching the battle reports. They had seen Colony Sejong destroyed and Earth nearly overwhelmed. They understood in their bones that peace was precious because war was terrible. But they also understood that sometimes war was necessary. And when it came, humanity had to be ready to fight and win. Years passed. The human fleet grew to sizes that dwarfed even the Vorth armada that had attacked Earth. New colonies were established in systems far from the galactic core, away from council space. Human exploration vessels encountered other species occasionally, but the meetings were brief and wary. The aliens had heard stories about the battle for Earth. They kept their distance. The Galactic Council tried several times to re-establish contact with humanity. Diplomatic envoys were sent offering trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Each time, they were politely but firmly turned away. Humanity remembered. They would not forget what the Council had sanctioned. Perhaps in a few more generations, when the memory of Colony Sejong had faded, there could be reconciliation. But not yet. Not while survivors still grieved. Ambassador Kreth, living in exile in a remote Vorth settlement, sent one final communication before disappearing from public record. It was addressed to the galactic networks, distributed anonymously to ensure it couldn't be suppressed. The message was simple but profound. A warning to every species in the galaxy. He wrote that he had made the worst mistake of his career by underestimating humanity. The humans had appeared peaceful not because they were weak, but because they understood the cost of violence. They had chosen peace deliberately, consciously, knowing they could wage war if necessary. When forced to fight, they revealed capabilities that shocked even themselves. Their industrial capacity, their tactical innovation, their willingness to sacrifice. All of it had been hidden beneath a veneer of civilization. The warning continued. Never attack the humans. Do not mistake their preference for peace as an inability to wage war. They are not like other species. They spent thousands of years fighting each other and learned every possible way to kill efficiently. When united by external threat, they become unstoppable. The Vorth Empire learned this at the cost of its future. Learn from our mistake. Face their wrath, and survival is impossible. Engineer Minho, now in his 60s, stood at the memorial for Colony Sejong that had been built on Earth. The monument listed every name of those killed in the attack that started the war. He came here every year on the anniversary. as did thousands of others. Young cadets fresh from training stood beside elderly veterans. They came to remember and to promise that those deaths would not be forgotten. A group of cadets approached Minho, recognizing him from their studies of the war. They asked him what the war had taught humanity. He thought for a long moment before answering. The war taught them that peace was not guaranteed, that other species could be driven by fear to terrible actions, that humanity had to remain vigilant and strong to protect what they had built. But most importantly, Minho told the cadets, the war taught humanity about itself. Before the conflict, humans had been divided by nationality, culture, and beliefs. The attack on Colony Sajong had united them in ways nothing else could. They discovered they could accomplish incredible things when working toward a common goal. They found strength in unity and purpose in shared struggle. One cadet asked if Minho thought there would be another war. He looked up at the stars visible through the memorial's transparent dome. Out there somewhere, thousands of alien species lived their lives. Some might still fear humanity. Others might respect them. A few might even become friends someday. But regardless of what the future held, humanity would be ready. Minho answered honestly. He hoped there would never be another war. War was terrible, destructive, and tragic. But if war came again, humanity would face it the same way they faced the Vorth, with courage, determination, and the absolute certainty that they would do whatever necessary to survive.